The basement hearing room of the Halsey County Annex smelled of wet wool and radiator dust on the 9th of February, and Odessa Trammell, 73 years old, sat in the third row from the back with a bank envelope flat in the bottom of her handbag and both hands folded on top of it. Inside the envelope was $1,940 in 20s and 10s. Counted 3 separate times at the drop-leaf table in the 2 rented rooms she kept above the Shut Pharmacy on Quarry Street, and it stood for 11 years of setting aside what could be set aside out of a check that had never once been generous. She had worn her good coat, the brown one with the toggle buttons, and she had come early enough to get a chair on the aisle. And she had brought a pencil, and the printed list the county mailed out in January folded to the second page, where item 11 had a light ring drawn around it in pencil. Item 11 was a lot on the low end of Quarry Street, 40 feet by 120, weeds and a concrete stoop where a house had stood until the borough pulled it down. And Odessa had walked past it twice a week for 2 years, thinking that a lot like that would hold a small trailer and a clothesline and a raised bed of tomatoes, and that a woman who owned 40 feet of ground could not be told at the end of a month that the building had been sold and she had until the 15th. That was the whole of her ambition on the 9th of February. She had not come for a building. She had come for 40 feet of weeds. The deputy county treasurer, a compact and unhurried woman named Delphia Rooks, set her water glass on the podium at 10 minutes past 9 and began working down the list in the flat voice of somebody who does this 4 times a year and has learned not to make a performance of it. And the first several items went the way such items go in a county that has more surplus than buyers. A ditch stripped behind the co-op, no bids, struck to the county. A 1/4 acre of hillside, too steep to build on, no bids. A garage on Farrell Street with the roof gone, sold to a man in a canvas coat for $400, and he laughed when he said it. Because he was buying it for the block, and the block was worth more than the garage. There were maybe 35 people in the room, most of them men, most of them known to each other, and the radiators knocked, and somebody's phone rang twice before he got it silenced, and Delphia Rooks read the legal descriptions without hurry and without any music in them at all. Item 11 came up at 20 past 9. She read it, 40 feet by 120 on the west side of Quarry, taxes owed $916, minimum bid $925, and Odessa's hand went up so fast that she surprised herself, and for about 9 seconds she owned it. Then a heavy young man near the front with a phone against his ear said 1,000. And a contractor named Ivo Bardeen said 1,100, and the 2 of them went at it in $25 raises the way 2 men will when neither one wants to be beaten in front of people he knows, and it ended at $2,400, which was $460 more than Odessa Trammell had in the world. She put her hand back in her lap. She did not feel much of anything about it, which was the part she thought about later. She had wanted that lot for 2 years, and she had lost it in 90 seconds to 2 men who wanted it for an afternoon, and what she felt was mostly the wish to leave before the room got up and put its coats on and somebody asked her how she was doing over there on Quarry Street. She stayed because the aisle was full and because leaving in the middle draws more eyes than sitting still, and that is the only reason on this earth that Odessa Trammell was still in her chair at 10 minutes to 10 when Delphia Rooks came to item 22. Item 22, Rooks read, is a parcel of 1 4/10 acres at the corner of Fell and 8th in Tilden Borough. Improvements listed as 1 municipal bath building of yellow brick, 2 stories, approximately 14,000 square feet, together with attached laundry annex, boiler hall, and appurtenances. Taxes and costs owed $1,842. Minimum bid $1,850. Something went through the room that was not quite a laugh at first. It was more like the sound a crowd makes when it recognizes an old joke coming, and then it did become a laugh, because a man in the second row said out loud, "Does it come with the pigeons?" And a man behind him said, "The pigeons come with the roof, and the roof comes with the rain." And there was a good 10 seconds of the kind of laughter that a small county gives to a building it has agreed to be ashamed of. The Tilden Baths had been shut since 1961. Everybody in that room over the age of 60 had bathed in it or waited outside it or been sent past it on an errand, and everybody under 60 had grown up looking at plywood over its windows and a chain through its door handles, and there is no object on earth that a town will mock more thoroughly than a thing it used to be proud of. Delphia Rooks let the laughing run out. Then she said, "Do I hear $1,850? A man in the front row, in a gray quarter zip with a leather folder in his lap, said 1,850, without standing and without looking up, in the bored voice of a man doing an errand he has done before. His name was Curtis Mabry, and he worked out of an office in Zanesville for a firm that assembled small commercial sites in small towns. And everybody in Tilden Borough who read the register call knew that there was a purchase option on the corner of Fell and 8th, contingent on the site being delivered clear, which is the language men use when they mean with the building knocked down and hauled off. Rooks said, 1,850, do I hear 1,900? Nobody, she said, 1,850 going once. Odessa Trammell heard her own voice before she had decided to use it. She said 1,875. It came out at about the volume of a woman answering a question in church, and it carried the whole room anyway. Because the room had gone quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when a raise comes from a direction nobody was watching. Every head in the place came around. Curtis Mabry turned in his chair with the leather folder sliding off his knee, and he looked at her for a second and a half, and then he did the thing that decided the next 5 months of her life, and, though nobody in that basement could have told you so, the next 50 years of Tilden Borough. He said, "Hold on." He said, "I need a minute here." He stood up with his phone already in his hand and started for the door, and Delphia Rooks, who had been running surplus sales for 19 years and had a bus to catch at noon, said, "The sale does not hold for a bidder, sir. You may bid or you may not." He said, "Give me 2 minutes," and she said, 1,875 going once, and he was in the doorway with the phone at his ear saying somebody's name, and she said going twice, and he had his hand up, but his hand was up in the way that means wait, not the way that means I bid, and Delphia Rooks was not in the business of interpreting hands. He brought the gavel down on the podium, which was a rented podium, and made a poor flat sound, and she said, "Sold at $1,875 to the lady in the brown coat, and would you come to the table, please, ma'am, with your identification." Odessa Trammell walked up the middle aisle of that basement past 35 people who had known her all her life. And she was aware of every step. And she was aware that her coat was 11 years old, and she was aware that she had just spent every dollar she owned, except 65 of them on a building she had not known would be for sale when she got dressed that morning. A woman she had gone to school with reached out and touched her sleeve as she passed and said, "Odessa, honey, what are you doing?" She did not have an answer that would fit in a sentence, so she said the only true thing she had, which was, "I used to wait for my daddy on those steps." She counted the money out on the table in front of Delphia Rooks, 20s and 10s, and it took a while, and the room watched her do it, and when she got to the end, she was $15 short of the recording fee, and a man she did not know put a 10 and a 5 on the table without saying anything, and walked away before she could thank him. She never did find out who it was. She used to say afterward that she hoped he had been at the reopening, because if he was, he had gotten his $15 back about 400 times over, and he would never know it. To understand what Odessa Trammell did in that basement, you have to understand what she had been for 51 years, which was a woman who cleaned things for other people. She had started at 17 in the laundry of the Halsey County Hospital in the days when a county hospital still washed its own sheets. And she had worked the mangle and then the presses and then the sorting floor, and she had left there at 31 when her husband Delmer got on steady at the Tilden sheet and tube, and they thought, the way people did think then. That one steady check would be enough. It was enough for 9 years. Then the tube mill went to 2 shifts, and then to 1, and then to a watchman and a fence, and Delmer Trammell, who was a pipe fitter and a patient man, and could braze a joint that would outlive the pipe on either side of it, spent the last 19 years of his working life driving to 3 different towns for work that was always about to become permanent and never did. Odessa went back to cleaning. She cleaned the Presbyterian church and the dentist's office, over the hardware, and for the last 22 years, the Tilden Elementary School, floors and lavatories and the cafeteria after lunch. And she was good at it in the particular way of a person who was never going to be promoted and decided a long time ago that the work would be right anyway. Delmer died 11 years back in the front room of the house they rented on Said Street, which they had rented for 34 years and never owned a nail of, and the landlord's son sold it 4 months after the funeral, and Odessa moved into the 2 rooms above the shut pharmacy on Quarry, and that was where she had been ever since, 65 stairs up from the sidewalk. With a hot plate and a good chair, and a window that looked north over the roofs of the borough toward the river. She had a son, Garvin, in Columbus, who called on Sundays and meant well, and had a wife with opinions and a mortgage of his own, and she had a granddaughter named Willa, who was 19 and away at the community college in Cambridge, learning to be a dental hygienist. She had never in her life owned real property. She had never signed anything at a bank except the back of a check. And she was, at 73, on the 8th month of a lease, the new owner of the pharmacy building had already told her he did not intend to renew because he was going to gut the whole thing and put in short-term rentals for the fishermen who came up the sedge in May. That was the arithmetic in the handbag. That was why a woman with $1,940 had gotten on a county bus at 8 in the morning to bid on 40 feet of weeds. But the reason she raised her hand for item 22, and she said this many times afterward and never varied it, had nothing to do with arithmetic at all. Her father was named Otto Kolb, and everybody called him Ott, and he had gone down the Ardmore No. 4 across the river for 31 years, and from 1941, when Odessa was born, until the 11th of March in 1961, Ott Kolb had walked off the ferry landing at the end of shift and up 8th Street and into the Tilden public baths, and had come back out of them a different color. That was how she had understood him as a small child. There was a man who went away in the dark gray of a work coat and came home black to the eyes with a red rim where his lamp strap had been, and in between there was a yellow brick building on the corner with steam standing off its roof vents in winter and inside that building. By some arrangement she did not question, the black came off. She used to be sent up to wait for him. She would sit on the second of the 4 limestone steps with her back against the door frame, and the door would open and shut and open and shut and let out a smell she could still call up at 73, which was green soap and hot iron and wet stone all at once. And men would come out with their hair slicked flat and their collars dark where the water had gotten in, and they would say, "Your daddy's in the tub, sister. He'll be along." Then Ott Kolb would come out pink as a baby with his lunch bucket in one hand and his hair combed with water, and he would sit down on the step beside her and put his hand on the top of her head for a second, and they would walk home. It cost 15 cents in those years, and the borough took it out of the miners' pay by arrangement. And every man had a numbered brass check on a board behind the attendant's cage, and Ott Kalb's number was 214. Odessa Trammell had not thought about the number 214 in probably 40 years. She thought about it on the 9th of February in the basement of the Halsey County Annex when Delphia Rooks said the words boiler hall, and her hand went up. And afterward, she could not have told you honestly which came first. The county gave her a receipt on the 9th, and the deed came in the mail on the 28th in a windowed envelope with a certified sticker, and she opened it standing up at the counter of the post office on Fell Street because she could not wait the 4 blocks home. It was 2 pages. The first page was the granting language and the tax parcel number and the price, $1,875, typed out and then written again in words underneath the way deeds still do it, and the legal description ran on for most of the second page in the manner of a document that has been copied forward out of an older document by a long series of people who did not. Read it. Odessa took it home and laid it flat on the drop leaf table and read it through twice with a ruler under the line, the way she had been taught to read anything that mattered, and the second time she got to the end and stopped. The description had been carried forward, it turned out of the original borough dedication of 1911, because in 115 years nobody had ever had a reason to draw a new one, and the last clause of it said this: together with the boiler hall and pump room beneath, and all machinery, fixtures, tile, fittings, and furnishings therein contained, and the well and the waters thereof, and the record books of the attendant, the same being appurtenant to and conveyed with the premises. She read that sentence perhaps 9 times. She did not understand all of it. She understood the words tile and well and record books, and she understood in the vague way that a person who has never owned anything understands ownership, that a deed which troubles itself to name a book has named that book on purpose. On the 2nd of March, she carried the deed up 2 flights of stairs over the insurance office to Hollis Prather, who was 81 years old and had practiced law in Tilden Borough since 1970 and had not taken a new client in 6 years. He read it with a magnifier. He put the magnifier down and read it again without it. He asked her what she had paid, and she told him, and he made a noise in his throat that she could not interpret, and then he got up and went to a shelf and came back with a bound volume of borough ordinances the color of a dried leaf. It took him 20 minutes to find it. Ordinance 41 of 1911, adopted the 14th of June, accepting the gift of Ansel Fell, glass manufacturer, of $11,000 toward the construction of a public bath, appropriating the balance out of the general fund, and dedicating the premises at Fell and 8th to the use of the people of Tilden Borough for the purpose of bathing and washing, forever. Hollis Prather said the word forever out loud with his finger on it. Then he said, Odessa, I want you to understand something about what has happened here. He said, the borough shut this building in 1961 and padlocked it and stopped thinking about it. And then in 1994, it went onto the county's tax books because the borough had transferred it to a nonprofit trust that folded inside of 4 years. And from that day, it has been a tax parcel, like any other tax parcel, carried forward on a description that nobody has read since Woodrow Wilson was president. He said, they sold you the building because they wanted it gone, but they did not sell you the building. They sold you the description. And the description, he said, includes a well and a book. He asked him whether that was a good thing or a bad thing. He said he did not know yet, and that he would take $1 for the file, and that if it turned into anything he would take more, and she gave him $1 out of the 65 she had left, and he wrote her a receipt for it and put the dollar in his desk drawer, and it was still in that drawer when he died 2 years later, and his daughter found it folded around a note in his hand that said, First fee in 6 years, best one in 50. The borough of Tilden found out on the 4th of March. Vaughn Skiles, who was president of the borough council and had been for 11 years, and who ran the propane business out on the state route, came to the sale record in a routine packet from the county and read the buyer's name and did not know it, and then asked somebody, and then knew it. There had been an option agreement on that corner since the previous August. A retail development group had taken a position it fell an eighth contingent upon delivery of a cleared site, and the borough had gone so far as to solicit demolition quotes, of which the low one was $94,000 and the high one was $141,000. The whole spread being a question of what anybody believed was inside the walls. The borough did not have $94,000. The borough's plan, and it was not a secret and it was not even particularly dishonest, was to let the county sell the parcel at the surplus sale to the developer's agent for the amount of the arrears, at which point the developer would swallow the demolition as part of his site cost, and the borough would finally get a taxable use on a corner that had generated nothing since Kennedy was in office. It was a reasonable plan. It had exactly one moving part, and the moving part was that nobody else on earth would bid, and on the 9th of February, a 73-year-old school custodian in a brown coat had raised her hand and put $25 on top of it. Odessa received the first letter on the 11th of March, a date she noticed only later. Because the 11th of March was the day the Baths had closed 5 years before. It came from a firm in Columbus on behalf of Tilden Borough, and it was courteous, and it was 3 paragraphs long, and it said that the county's conveyance appeared to contain a scrivener's error, that certain subsurface improvements and appurtenances had never been intended to pass, that the borough retained an interest in the water source located upon the premises, and that the borough was prepared to reimburse her purchase price in full together with a consideration of $2,000 in exchange for a quitclaim deed. She carried it up the 2 flights to Hollis Prather. He read it and laughed once, a dry sound like a door in a frame. He said, "Odessa, do you know what this letter is?" He said, "This letter is a man telling you in writing what is valuable on your own property and paying a lawyer $400 an hour to tell you." He said, "Do not answer it." He said, "Go and look at your building." She had not been inside it. She had walked around it 11 times in 3 weeks, all the way around, along Fell and down 8th and up the alley behind, and she had put her hand flat on the yellow brick more than once, but the county had handed her a key to a padlock that no longer existed, and the doors were chained. And she had been waiting, she admitted long afterward, out of something that was not quite fear and was not quite manners. On the 14th of March, a retired man named Arnie Vetch, who had been the borough's water and sewer engineer for 26 years and had gone through school with her husband, came around the corner while she was standing there and asked whether she wanted to get in or whether she only wanted to look at it, and she said she supposed she had better get in. And he went home and came back with a bolt cutter and a 5-cell flashlight and a paper dust mask for each of them, and that is how Odessa Trammell entered the Tilden public baths on a Saturday morning in the middle of March. The chain came off in one bite, the right-hand door had swollen in its frame, and Arnie Vetch had to put his shoulder into it 3 times. And then it came in with the sound of a stuck drawer, and a wash of cold air came out of the building past them, and it was not a bad smell. That was the first surprise. 65 years of a shut building ought to smell like rot, and it smelled like a cave. Cold stone and iron with a faint mineral sweetness underneath it, and Arnie Vetch stopped in the doorway and said, "Huh," and then said, "That is the well you are smelling," and did not explain what he meant by it for another 2 months. The lobby was 30 feet across, with a tile floor laid in hexagons of cream and a dull green, and the pigeons had gotten into the 2nd floor through the north gable, and there was a hand's depth of their leavings along the mezzanine rail and down the stairs, and the plaster had come off the ceiling in 3 great continents that lay on the floor exactly where they had fallen. The daylight came from above. Nobody had told her about the skylight. Running the whole length of the main hall, 62 feet of it, was a barrel vault of glass in an iron frame, and the glass was prismatic, ribbed on the underside to throw the light sideways into the corners, and it was filthy, and it was entirely intact. And the March sun came through it green and gold, and laid a long, soft ladder of light straight down the middle of that ruined room. Odessa Trammell stood in the middle of the ladder with the dust mask still in her hand and did not move for some while. She had been in that lobby exactly twice in her life, both times as a girl, both times sent in to fetch her father because it was raining. And she had remembered it as a dark place because she had remembered it as a place full of men. It was not dark. It had never been dark. It was the brightest room in Tilden Borough, and it had been standing there, empty and full of light, for 65 years, with plywood over the street windows so that nobody outside could see it. They spent 4 hours in it that first day and came out at dusk with their arms grimed to the elbow, and Odessa Trammell, who had cleaned buildings for 51 years and could read a building the way a farmer reads a field, understood before they were halfway around that whatever she had not bought a ruin. A ruin is a building the weather has been inside of. The weather had not been inside this one. The roof was slate on the main hall and standing seam metal over the annex, and the metal had lifted at the north gable and let the pigeons in, and that was the whole of the failure. One gable, 6 feet of it, and everything that had rotted in that building had rotted within 30 feet of that hole. Everything else was cold and dry and covered in 65 years of the fine gray felt that settles in a place where nothing moves. Behind the lobby was the attendant's cage, an oak counter with a brass grill above it and a swinging half door, and behind the counter, screwed to the wall, was the checkboard. It was 7 feet long and made of quarter-sawn oak with 360 brass hooks in it in 12 rows of 30, and each hook had a small stamped number above it, and hanging on the hooks, still, were 197 brass checks the size of a $50 with holes drilled at the top. The other 163 hooks were empty. Odessa stood in front of that board with the flashlight and worked her way along the rows with her lips moving, and when she came to hook 214, there was no check on it, and she put her finger on the hook and left it there long enough that Arnie Vetch went and looked at something else out of politeness. On the men's side there were 24 shower stalls in 2 facing ranks with a marble curb along the front of each and a brass mixing valve at every one, and the valves had all been closed and all of them had been wiped, which she noticed, because a man closing up a building he expects to see again wipes a valve, and a man closing up a building forever does not. At the end of the men's hall was the plunge, a pool 32 feet by 18, 3.5 feet deep at the shallow end, and 6 at the deep, empty and swept, and it was lined from the coping down with tile, and the tile was the thing that later brought people to Tilden Borough from 4 states. It was not white. That was the point of it, and it took an expert 5 minutes to explain what a 9-year-old would have known by looking. The plunge and the arcade around it and the whole face of the wall behind the fountain at the shallow end were faced in a dense matte faience in 11 colors, a soft ochre and 2 greens, and a blue that had a gray in it, and a warm cream ground laid in panels, and the panels had pictures. There was a river with a ferry on it. There was a hillside with a tipple and a headframe. There were 4 sheaves of wheat in a border of oak leaves, and over the fountain, a woman in a plain dress pouring water out of a jar with both hands, 6 feet tall, made of 140 separate glazed pieces, and her face was not damaged, and her hands were not damaged, and there was not a crack in her anywhere. On the women's side, which was smaller, there were 16 stalls and 8 tubs in private closets with oak doors and a smaller plunge, and a room with 11 laundry sinks and a mangle still bolted to the floor. That was the room Odessa's mother had used. Vestakalb had brought the wash up 8th Street in a wheeled basket every Tuesday for 19 years because there was hot water in that room and there was no hot water at their house, and a woman could do a family wash in 2 hours in the borough sinks for a nickel and hang it in the drying room, which was a long, narrow chamber with wooden racks that ran out on rails over a bank of steam. Coils, and 11 of the 12 racks were still run in, and on the 12th, run halfway out, was a single wooden clothespin. And then, at the bottom of the back stair, past the coal chute and the shut-off cabinet and a wall of white glazed brick, there was a steel door. It was not the sort of door a building usually has inside of it. It was a plate door, riveted in a steel frame set into the masonry of the kind put in when a boiler represented the most dangerous thing in a town. And it had 2 hinges as long as a man's forearm and a mortise lock with a keyhole and no key. And on the face of it, at eye height, someone had wired on a square of tin with holes punched through it and had written on it in white paint that had "Gone the color of old teeth." Arnie Vetch put the flashlight on it. It said, "Boiler Hall closed by order, the 11th of March, 1961. All lockers within. Apply to the attendant, E. Vukovich." Odessa Trammell said, who is E. Vukovich, and Arnie Vetch, who was 79 and had been born on 8th Street 2 blocks up, said, "Emil," he said, "Emil ran this place." He said, "My mother said he ran it from before the war until they shut it, and he was the only man in Tilden who knew everybody's number by heart." They tried the door. It was locked, and it was locked properly, and the lock was a mortise lock of a quality that does not exist anymore. And when Arnie Vetch put a pry bar to the frame in a place where the mortar had gone soft, he got about a 1/16 of an inch, and then he put the bar down and said, "No." He said, "Odessa, that is a 100-year-old lock in a steel frame and a brick wall, and I can get you through it. But I will have to cut the door, and once I cut the door, you have cut a piece off the building, and I do not think you want to be the person who did that." She agreed with him, and she did not know why she agreed with him. It cost her 9 weeks. She spent them the way a person without money spends time, which is generously. She got the hole in the north gable shut on the 22nd of March with $60 of her son's money and a roofer named Pell Ostrander who charged her for the metal and not the labor, and after that she went to that building 6 days a week and cleaned it, because that was what she knew how to do. She swept the lobby in 11 passes over 4 days. She carried out the pigeon leavings in a wheelbarrow, 41 loads. She washed the hexagon floor of the lobby on her knees with a bucket of the borough's water and a stiff brush, and found that it was not cream and green, but cream and a deep bottle green, and that there was a border of ochre keys around the whole room that had not been visible under the felt. Junie Krim, who had worked the laundromat on Farrell Street for 30 years and had no more money than Odessa did, started coming on Thursdays. Then Junie's brother-in-law came with a shop vacuum. Then 2 boys from the high school who needed service hours came and stayed after the hours were signed. By the end of April, there were 9 people in that building on a Saturday, and the borough's letters had gotten shorter and less courteous, and Vaughn Skiles had said in a public meeting, and it was printed in the Register Call, that the borough had no intention of watching a private individual create a public liability out of a condemned structure. The building was not condemned. Hollis Prather made the borough put that in writing, and the borough could not, because to condemn it, the borough would have had to inspect it, and the last inspection of record was from 1959, and it said the structure was sound. Meanwhile, Odessa was looking for a key. She asked at the borough office and was told the borough had no keys to a building it did not own. She asked the county, and the county had a file with 4 pages in it. She put a notice in the register call in the last week of March, 30 words, asking whether anyone had anything at all belonging to Emil Vukovich, and got 2 calls, one from a woman who had confused him with a different man, and one, on the 7th of April, from a nurse at a residence in Wheeling, West Virginia, who said she was calling on behalf of a resident named Anka Pelham, aged 89, whose maiden name had been Vukovich, and who wished to know whether the lady in the newspaper was the person who had bought her father's building. Junie Krim drove her down to Wheeling on the 11th of April in a car with a bad blower motor, an hour and 50 minutes each way. And they took a coffee cake, because you do not go empty-handed to see a woman of 89. Anka Pelham was small and clear-eyed and sat in a chair by a window with a folded newspaper on her knee, and the first thing she said, before hello, was that her father had talked about that building until the week he died, and that nobody in her family had wanted to hear about it for 60 years. And now here was a stranger who had driven 2 hours to hear about it, and would they please sit down? Emil Vukovich had come over from Rijeka at 19 and had gone into the Ardmore No. 4 for 2 years and had come out of it with a lung that whistled, and in 1920 the borough had hired him at the baths at $18 a week, and he had stayed 41 years. He had learned to say every man's name, and he had learned to say it the way the man's mother said it, which in a town with 11 nationalities in it was not a small skill, and by the middle of the 1930s he could stand at that counter and hand a man his check before the man had finished coming through the door. He kept the boiler himself. He kept the water at 108 degrees on the shower side and 68 in the plunge, and he wrote both temperatures down twice a day for 41 years. He gave out the green soap, and he gave out towels, and he took the 15 cents. And when a man did not have the 15 cents, he took nothing and wrote the man's number in a separate column. And Anka Pelham said that the separate column was the reason her mother went to her grave believing that Emil Vukovich had been the softest businessman in the Ohio Valley. And then, she said, they shut it at noon. That was the part her father never got over, and she told it slowly because she had heard it many hundreds of times. On the 11th of March in 1961, which was a Saturday, a man from the borough came at 11:30 in the morning with a paper and told Emil Vukovich that the council had voted on the Thursday night to cease operation of the public bath effective immediately, that the boiler would not be fired again, and that the doors would be chained at noon. There had been no notice in the paper. There had been notice at the council meeting, which 9 people attended. The mine ran a Saturday shift, and there were 60-odd men across the river underground at that moment with their clothes and their watches and their razors and their wedding bands hanging in the lockers on the men's side, because that is what a locker in a bathhouse is for. And Emil Vukovich stood in his own lobby and asked the man from the borough what he was supposed to do about the lockers. The man from the borough said the borough would deal with the lockers. Emil Vukovich did not believe him, and Emil Vukovich was right. He kept his keys. He was not supposed to, and nobody asked for them for 11 days, and in those 11 days he went into that building alone in the mornings, and he went down the row of the men's lockers, and he opened each one that still had something in it, and he did not empty them into a barrel the way the borough would have. He took each locker's contents out and wrapped them in the man's own towel and tied the bundle with string and wrote the man's number and the man's name on a manila shipping tag and a copying pencil, and he carried the bundles down the back stair to the boiler hall, which was the only room in that building with a steel door and a lock worth anything. And he stood them on the shelving along the north wall in numerical order. There were 63 of them. Then he wired a piece of tin to the door with his own name on it, because he expected the men to come, and he expected to be there to hand the bundles across, and he locked the steel door and turned in every key he had except one. Nobody came. A few did, Anka said in the first year, and her father met them at the sidewalk and could not get them in, because by then the borough had chained the outside doors, and Emil Vukovic's key opened the boiler hall and nothing else. He went to 2 council meetings about it. He is in the minutes of one of them, 4 lines, in which a councilman is recorded as saying that the matter of personal property left in the bath building would be taken up at a future meeting, and it never was. Then the mine cut the Saturday shift, and then the mine cut the 3rd shift, and men moved away to Lorraine and to Detroit, and the ones who stayed learned to wash in the kitchen. And after a while, a man's shaving mug behind a steel door stopped being a thing anybody could stand to think about. Emil Vukovic died of a stroke in 1963 at 68 years old in the front room of a house on 8th Street, 200 yards from the door he had locked, and his widow put his things in a box, and the box went into a closet, and then into a different closet, and then in 1988 into Anka Pelham's basement in Wheeling. And she brought it up out of that basement in 1999 when the water came, and it had been on the shelf of her closet at the residence ever since. It was a cigar tin with a picture of a ship on it. She had the nurse fetch it while Odessa and Junie sat there with their coffee going cold. Inside it was a rosary, a photograph of a christening, a union card, a pair of reading glasses with one arm gone, a stub of copying pencil worn to 2 inches, and, wired to a manila shipping tag gone the color of weak tea, a brass key 3.5 inches long. The tag said in a copying pencil that a man had licked before he wrote with it, Boiler Hall, and under that, 63, and under that, Hold. Anka Pelham put the key in Odessa Trammell's hand and closed her fingers over it with both of her own hands, which were very light, and she said, My father waited 11 days, and then he waited 2 years, and I have waited a good deal longer than that, and I am not going to be told again that it will be taken up at a future meeting. She said, Go and open the door, and then telephone me, and I do not care what hour it is. She did not go straight to the door. That surprised the people around her, and it surprised her son on the telephone, and the reason was the other thing Anka Pelham had said as they were leaving, which was that her father had never taken the book home because the book belonged to the building, and that it would be in the drawer under the checkboard where it had always been, and that if the borough had thrown it out, then the borough had thrown out the town. So on the 12th of April, a Sunday, Odessa Trammell went into the attendant's cage with Arnie Vetch and a screwdriver and looked at the oak counter properly for the first time instead of past it. There were 3 drawers. The top 2 were unlocked and held nothing but a brass towel counter, a tin of shoe tacks, and 11 cardboard tickets for a raffle drawn in 1958. The bottom drawer was locked, and the lock was a $2 lock, and Arnie Vetch had it open in under a minute with a screwdriver and a piece of piano wire, and he did it gently, and he still apologized to the wood afterward. Inside the drawer, lying flat, were 4 ledgers. They were bound in black canvas with red corners, 13 inches by 9, and the spines were labeled in the same copying pencil as the tag on the key, 1920 to 1931, 1931 to 1942, 1942 to 1953, 1953 too. The 4th one had no closing year on the spine, because a man does not write the closing year on a book he expects to keep using. They took them up into the light of the barrel vault and laid them on a plank across 2 sawhorses, and Odessa washed her hands twice at the outside spigot before she would touch them. The pages were ruled in blue, and every page was the same, and every page was different. Date at the top. Weather, water temperature, shower side, morning and evening. Water temperature, plunge, morning and evening. Coal consumed in scoops, which was Emil Vukovic's own unit and appears nowhere in any borough record. Baths sold, laundry sinks let, towels out and towels in. And then, down the right side of every page, a narrow column headed with one word: Notes. And it was the notes column that made 3 grown people stand around a plank in a wrecked building for 5 hours on a Sunday. The notes were not sentimental. That was what undid people about them. The 11th of January, 1934, 22 below at 6 in the morning, no coal delivery, burned the broken pallet, 41 baths. The 3rd of September, 1936, number 119 brought his boy, first time, gave the boy a towel, no charge. The 28th of November, 1940, number 214 paid up his back column, $8.10, told him to keep 4 of it. He would not. That entry was on the left-hand page about a third of the way down, and Odessa Trammell read it and sat down on an overturned bucket and did not say anything for a good while, and Junie Crim put a hand on her shoulder, and neither of them made any fuss about it. The 19th of April, 1943, no hot water, boiler tube, ran the plunge cold, 14 men swam anyway. The 2nd of December, 1947, the Fell Mill closed, 196 baths, most in one day since the war. There were deaths in it, a man's number and the word gone and a date, and then, in the margin, sometimes, the number crossed through with a single line and the check taken off the board and put in an envelope for the family. And Emil Vukovich noted the envelope every time, because he noted everything. There were 360 numbers in that book across 41 years, and they were the census of a town that no census had ever bothered to take properly. The men who had no bathroom, and the women who had no hot water, and the boys who came with their fathers and got their own number at 14. The last book ran out on the 9th of March in 1961 with an ordinary page. Weather, rain going to snow, water 108 and 107, coal 9 scoops, baths 31. Then a blank line for the 10th, which was a Friday, and then the 11th of March, and the entry for the 11th of March was written in a different pen, and it was longer than any other entry in 4 books. It said that the council had voted on the 9th and that he was informed at 11:35 in the morning by a man whose name he wrote down and then crossed out and did not write again. It said that the boiler was drawn down at 12:15 and banked, and that he had let the plunge stand rather than dump it because he did not have instructions to dump it. It said 63 lockers occupied at closing, men underground or on the far shift, contents secured. And then, over the next 4 pages, on ruled lines, he drew himself with a straightedge. Emil Vukovich had listed all 63 of them, number and name in his own hand in the copying pencil. Number 7, Vukovich, E, which was his own and which he had listed with the rest as if he were a customer in his own house. Number 19, Frayne, Milo. Number 88, Pettyway, Alonzo. Number 141, Bziak, Stefan. Number 250, Beebe, Walton. Number 302, Hawker, Roydell. And on the second of the 4 pages, 11th from the top, in the same even hand as all the rest, number 214, Kalb, Otto. Beside it, in the margin, in a pencil that had been sharpened since, Emil Vukovich had written 2 words that were not in the format of any other entry in 4 books, and that were, when a photograph of that page ran in the Register Call in June, and then in 3 papers in Cleveland and Pittsburgh, the 2 words everybody quoted. He had written, "Watch inside." They opened the steel door on the 18th of April at 10 minutes past 4 in the afternoon, and Odessa Trammell had thought about doing it alone and had decided against it for a reason she gave to Hollis Prother over the telephone, which was that if there was nothing in there, she wanted witnesses, and if there was something in there, she wanted witnesses more. So there were 9 people at the bottom of the back stair. Arnie Vetch with the flashlight, Junie Crim, Hollis Prather, who had come down the stairs one at a time with a hand on the rail and had refused help twice. Sylvie Boaz from the register call with a camera. The two high school boys. A woman from the County Historical Society who had asked to come and had been told yes. Garvin Trammell, who had driven up from Columbus that morning without being asked, which his mother did not comment on at the time, and did comment on later, often, and Odessa with a brass key 3.5 inches long that had been in a cigar tin in West Virginia for 38 years and in a closet in Ohio for 25 before that. It did not go in easily. The lock had been dry since before the moon landing, and Arnie Vetch put 4 drops of oil on the key and had her work it in and out 3 or 4 times without turning it, and then he said, "All right," and stepped back, and she turned it, and there was a heavy, dull sound out of the door like a stone dropped into a barrel, and the bolt came back. The door swung on Emil Vukovic's hinges without a sound. The boiler hall was 38 feet by 26, and the ceiling was a brick barrel vault, and the air that came out of it was 54 degrees, which was the temperature it had been every day for 65 years, and it was dry, and it was clean, and the dust on the floor was so thin it took a fingerprint. Filling the west end was the boiler, an Erie City Ironworks horizontal return tubular of 80 horsepower, riveted, 10 feet long, its brickwork intact, its firebox door standing open 6 inches, and its ash pit swept out and empty. The fire tools were racked on the wall in order of size. Above it, the steam header ran the length of the room in insulated wrap with brass valves at every branch. And every valve in that room was closed, and there was a tag on every valve, and every tag was in the same copying pencil. On the south wall was a Deming triplex pump on a concrete pad with its belt still on the flywheel and its oil cups full. And in the middle of the floor, in a raised curb of concrete 18 inches high with a brass plate let into the top of it, was the wellhead. The plate said, "Borough of Tilden, well number 1, drilled 1909 412 feet, and Arnie Vetch went to it the way a man goes to a grave he has been told about all his life, and put both hands flat on it and said, 'My God, they capped it, they never plugged it, and nobody paid attention to him at all.'" Because everybody else in the room was looking at the north wall. The north wall had shelving on it, plain plank shelving of a kind a man builds himself, 5 tiers running 22 feet. On the shelving, in numerical order, standing on end and leaning very slightly, were 63 bundles. Each one was a towel gone the color of weak tea, folded around something and tied twice with string. And out of each string, a manila shipping tag hung down, and on every tag was a number and a name in a copying pencil, and the pencil had not faded, because a copying pencil in a dark, dry room at 54 degrees does not fade. It waits. Nobody said anything for a while. Sylvie Boaz did not take a photograph for 4 minutes, which she wrote about later. And what she wrote was that it did not look like a discovery. It looked like a shop that was still open, and that the thing she had not been ready for was the order of it. Odessa Trammell walked the length of that shelf reading tags. Frayne, Petaway, Ziak, Beebe, Hocker, Vukovic on the top tier at the far left, because Emil had put himself first in the row and last in his own thinking. And 11th from the end of the second tier, at about the height of her chin, a bundle with a tag that said 214, Kalb, Otto. She stood there with her hand not quite on it, and she said, out loud, to a room with 9 people in it, "I sat on those steps and waited for him." Then she took it down. It weighed about what a cat weighs. They carried it up to the plank, across the sawhorses, under the barrel vault, because she said she was not going to open it in a cellar. And she untied the string herself and did not cut it, and the string came away in one piece, and she wound it around 2 fingers and put it in her cardigan pocket, and she had it there for the rest of her life. Inside the towel, wrapped the way a man wraps something for another man, were the following: a shaving mug of white ironstone with a chip out of the foot and a cake of soap dried to a disc in the bottom, a badger brush, a strop and a razor in a case, a pair of work socks rolled together with $4.11 inside them, which was a day and a half of pay in 1961, and which he had left there because a man leaves a little money in his locker the way a man leaves a little gas in the tank. A comb. A pay envelope from the Ardmore No. 4, dated the 10th of March, 1961, unopened, a photograph, printed small with a deckled edge, of a girl of about 9 sitting on a limestone step with her back against a door frame and her knees together and her hands in her lap, squinting into the sun, and in a chamois bag inside the mug, wrapped in a piece of flannel, a silver open-face pocket watch on a braided leather fob and on the inside of the back cover. Engraved by hand in letters a jeweler in Rijeka or Trieste or some other place had cut before anybody in that room was born, a name that was not Otto Kalb but Joseph Kalb, and a date, the 4th of June, 1898. It was her grandfather's. Her father had carried it every day of his working life and had hung it in a locker on a Saturday morning, because you do not take a watch underground, and had come up out of the Ardmore No. 4 at 4 in the afternoon to find the doors of the bathhouse chained shut, and had gone home black to the eyes for the first time in 31 years, and had washed at the kitchen sink while his wife held a towel and had told his 9-year-old daughter, who remembered it exactly, that they would let him in for it on Monday. Odessa Trammell wound it. It was a watch that had not been wound since the 10th of March in 1961, and she gave the crown 11 turns with her thumb and forefinger, and the balance took hold on the third turn, and it ran for 31 hours. And it kept, over that first day, a loss of about 4 minutes. What happened over the following 11 weeks happened in 2 channels at once, and Odessa Trammell was never entirely comfortable with the second one. The first channel was the well. Arnie Vetch came back on the 20th of April with a sounding tape and a borrowed pump and a friend from the state who owed him a favor. And they took the brass cap off well number 1 for the first time since 1961 and found what a man of his profession will talk about for the rest of his days, which was an 8-inch cased artesian well 412 feet down into the Berea sandstone, standing full to within 9 feet of the floor under its own head, with no more damage to the casing than a ring of scale. They ran it for 6 hours on the 23rd, and it made 38 gallons a minute at 4 degrees without a pump on it at all, and the laboratory in Zanesville came back with a report that used the words hard, sulfate-bearing, and, in the summary line, of unusual mineral character and free of coliform. Tilden Borough had abandoned that well in 1961 on the theory that a bath building without a bath does not need a well, and had joined the Regional Water Authority in 1968 and had been buying every gallon it drank ever since at a rate that had gone up in each of the last 19 years. Arnie Vetch worked it out on the back of the laboratory report and then worked it out again on a legal pad and put it in front of Hollis Prather, and Hollis Prather read it and said, "Well, that explains the second paragraph of their letter." The second channel was the tile. The woman from the County Historical Society had photographed the plunge room on the 18th of April and had sent 9 pictures to a man in Cincinnati named Tobias Wren, who dealt in architectural ceramic, and Tobias Wren drove up on the 2nd of May and walked into that room and put his bag down on the coping and did not pick it up again for 2 hours. It was Rookwood. The whole of it, the 11 colors and the fairy and the tipple and the sheaves of wheat and the 6-foot woman pouring water out of a jar over the fountain, was architectural faience out of the Rookwood pottery in Cincinnati, and Wren found the maker's marks on the back of a loose piece behind the fountain and dated the installation to 1912. and told her that of the public bathhouse installations Rookwood had made in Ohio, he could account for 4, and that 3 had been demolished, and that the 4th was standing in front of him with 65 years of dust on it and not one crack across the woman's face. He said, plainly and without any drama in it, that he had never seen an intact one. Then he asked her what she meant to do with it, and she said she did not know yet. And he wrote a number on the back of his own card and slid it across the coping, and the number was $240,000, and he said, "That is not me buying it. That is me telling you what a salvage broker will offer you within a month." And I would like you to hear it from somebody who does not want it. He was wrong by 3 weeks and by $54,000. On the 9th of May, a man named Roland Kesterson came to Tilden Borough from a firm outside Chicago that supplies reclaimed architectural material to restaurants and hotels, and he was pleasant, and he was quick, and he had a tape measure and a laser. And he offered $186,000 for the plunge room tile, removal at his cost, 4 weeks' work, cash at the start. Odessa Trammell said no on the sidewalk without going inside to think about it. He came back on the 2nd of June and offered $240,000 for the tile, the 24 brass mixing valves, the oak check board with its 360 hooks, and the barrel vault glass, and he pointed out to her, not unkindly, that she was 73 years old and lived in 2 rooms over a shut pharmacy and had $65 in the bank on the day she bought the building. She said no to that one on the sidewalk as well, and Sylvie Boaz printed the exchange in the register call. And it was that story, more than the door or the watch, that got picked up by the wire and put Tilden Borough on the front of a section in Cleveland under a photograph of a woman in a brown coat standing in a green ladder of light. The borough sued her on the 19th of May. The complaint asked the court to reform the deed on the ground of mutual mistake to declare that the boiler hall, the machinery, the well, and the waters thereof had not been intended to pass at a surplus tax sale for $1,875, and, in a paragraph added late, and in a different voice from the rest, to declare that the attendance record books were public records of the borough of Tilden and must be surrendered. Hollis Prather read that paragraph aloud twice in his office and then said, "Odessa, they have just told the judge that the book is worth having." It was heard on the 24th of June in the Common Pleas Court in the county seat, and it took one afternoon. The borough's lawyer from Columbus argued mutual mistake and argued it well, and said the price paid was evidence in itself that no reasonable party could have believed a municipal water source was being conveyed for less than $2,000. Hollis Prather, who was 81 and stood up slowly and did not use notes, made 3 points. The first was that there was no mistake by the county, because the county had published the description in January, mailed it to 400 addresses, and read it aloud in a public room, and that Curtis Mabry had bid on that same description and would have taken the well with it and said nothing. The second was that a party who is competent to solicit demolition quotes on a building is competent to read the deed to it. And the third point took 11 minutes and consisted of Hollis Prather reading into the record the entry of the 11th of March, 1961, and then the 4 pages of names. Number 7, Vukovich, Emil. Number 19, Frayne, Milo. Number 88, Pettyway, Alonzo, all 63. It took a long time, and the judge let him do it, and about a third of the way through, the borough's lawyer stopped writing on his pad. Then Hollis Prather said that the borough of Tilden was in that courtroom asking a judge to hand it the only surviving record of the property it had failed to return to 63 men, and that his client had spent her entire savings on the building that contained it and had been offered $240,000 for its face and had said no on the sidewalk, and that the court might consider which of the 2 parties before it had actually behaved like an owner. The judge took 9 days, The decision ran to 14 pages, and the sentence that got quoted was near the end of it, where he wrote that the borough sold what its own deed described, that a low price is the consequence of a low expectation and not a ground for undoing a sale, and that the record books were the private working papers of a borough employee kept without instruction and preserved without help, and had passed by the express words of a conveyance the borough itself had drafted in 1911 and had had 115 years to correct. Odessa Trommel did not celebrate the decision, and she did not give an interview about it. What she did on the second Saturday in July was put a notice in the register call, and she paid for it herself out of the first money she had earned in 11 years, which came from the State Historical Society for a licensed set of photographs of the log. The notice ran to 110 words, and it listed 63 numbers and 63 names. And it said that the property of these men had been secured on the 11th of March, 1961, by Emil Vukovich, attendant, and was now available to be claimed at the Tilden Public Baths by any descendant on presentation of nothing at all except the name. There were people who told her to require identification. She said that Emil Vukovich had run a 360-man business on his memory and the honor of a mill town, and she was not going to be the one to introduce paperwork. 41 of the 63 bundles went home between July and the following March. Alonzo Pettaway's daughter came from Akron and was 78 and sat down in a folding chair in the lobby and untied the string herself and found a harmonica and a union button and a photograph of herself as an infant. Stefan Bziok's grandson drove 9 hours from North Carolina for a rosary and a pair of steel-rimmed glasses and a letter in Polish that turned out to be from a brother nobody in that family had known existed. Walton Beebe's bundle held a set of dominoes in a cloth sack, and the man who came for it, a great-nephew of 41, said that his family had told a story for 60 years about a set of dominoes his uncle would not shut up about, and that he had always assumed it was a lie, and Odessa Trammell told him that almost nothing in that building had turned out to be a lie. 22 bundles were never claimed. They are on the same shelving, in the same order, in the boiler hall, and they will stay there. The building went on the National Register in the spring on the strength of the Rookwood installation, the intact prismatic vault, the well and the log, and the nomination ran to 61 pages and was written for nothing by a preservation architect from Columbus named Marlowe Ivy, who had read the newspaper story about a woman saying no on a sidewalk and had telephoned to ask whether she needed anybody. The listing brought a state capital grant of $385,000 against a match, and the match came in over 14 months out of an account at the Tilden Bank that took in $9,000 in its first month in amounts between $5 and $200 from a borough of 3,100 people that had spent 65 years agreeing to be ashamed of the building. Tilden Borough itself, under a council that had 2 new members by the following November and no longer had Vaughn Skiles as its president, voted 12 months after suing her to enter into a 40-year agreement to draw from well number 1 at a rate that pays the building's insurance, its taxes, its heat, and the wages of 1 part-time attendant, and not $1 more. Because that is how Hollis Prather drafted it 8 weeks before he died, and Odessa Trammell would not let anyone change a word of it after. The baths reopened on the 11th of March, which was the 66th anniversary of the noon when they closed. They did not open the way they had been. The plunge holds water again, and the 24 brass mixing valves were rebuilt one at a time by a retired steam fitter and 4 volunteers, and there are 11 showers running on the men's side and 8 on the women's. And the laundry annex has its 11 sinks and a new dryer bank where the steam racks used to be, and it is free on purpose. Anybody in Halsey County may bathe there and wash there on a Wednesday, a Friday, or a Saturday. And no one is asked a question at the counter. And the borough's caseworkers send people, and the shelter in the county seat sends people. And in the first year, 1,140 people used it, of whom the attendant estimates about a third had a bathtub at home and came because the room is beautiful. The checkboard is on the wall behind the counter with all 360 of its hooks, and it is in use. A person who comes regularly is given a number. The 4 ledgers are in a case at the end of the lobby under glass, open to the 11th of March, 1961, and the case is turned to a fresh page every month, and there is a 5th ledger now. Black canvas with red corners, 13 inches by 9, ruled in blue, in which the attendant writes the date and the weather and the water temperature on the shower side, morning and evening, twice a day, in a copying pencil, because Odessa Trammell went to some trouble to find where they still sell them. Anka Pelham came up from Wheeling for the reopening in a car with her granddaughter and a wheelchair she did not use, and she was 90 by then. And she stood at the door of her father's building for 1 hour and 11 minutes and shook the hand of every person who came in. And she got to say the sentence she had come to say about 40 times, which was, "My father kept your grandfather's things. And he would like you to know that he kept them properly." She died the following January. Her ashes are not at the baths because her family wanted her with her husband, but the cigar tin with the ship on it is in the case beside the ledgers, with the reading glasses and the 2-inch stub of copying pencil, and the brass key is in the lock of the boiler hall door on the inside, where it has been left standing since the 18th of April, because Odessa Trammell said the point of a key is that a door does not need one anymore. She lives in 3 rooms on the 2nd floor of the annex, above the drawing room, which the grant paid to make habitable and which she pays rent on to the nonprofit that now holds the building. $400 a month. And she is on the board of it and has 1 vote out of 7. Her grandson-in-law fixed her a chair by the north window. Her granddaughter Willa cleans the lobby floor on Sunday mornings on her knees with a stiff brush, because her grandmother showed her how, and because she has decided it is hers to do. The Silver Watch of Joseph Kalb. Made before 1898 and wound after 65 years in a room at 54 degrees, is not in the case with the other things. It is in Odessa Trammell's cardigan pocket alongside a wound-up piece of string, and she carries it every day and winds it every morning, and it loses about 4 minutes, and when people ask her, and strangers do ask her now, whether she had any notion of what was down there when she raised her hand in that basement, she tells them the plain truth, which is that she had none. She says she was a 73-year-old woman with $1,940 who had come to buy 40 feet of weeds and had lost them, and who bid $1,875 on a building because a woman at a podium said the words "boiler hall" out loud, and something in her went up like a hand in church. She says the county wrote down exactly what it was selling in 1911 and wrote it down again every time it copied the paper forward and read it out to a room of 35 people on the 9th of February, and that not one soul in Halsey County, herself included, had ever once read to the end of it. Then she generally says the other thing. The thing she says every 11th of March at noon, with the water running behind her and the green light coming down through the vault. She says, "This was never mine." She says, "A man named Emil Vukovich was told at 11:35 in the morning that it was over, and he spent the next 11 days wrapping other men's belongings in their own towels and writing their names on tags in a pencil he had to lick, and then he stood them up in order and locked a steel door and waited 2 years for people who could not come." She says, "He was not waiting for us. He was waiting for them." And then she goes behind the counter and takes down a brass check and hands it across, and somebody goes and gets clean.